Hello Twitch. Adjust my camera here a little bit. Let's open some messages. All right, messages are open. So today is Saturday, 12 Central Standard Time. That means we are starting the week here at Green Oaks Games. And our weeks run from Saturday through Sunday, and or Saturday through Friday, I should say. Friday is the end. Geez Louise, can tell it's a funky day. So you can see on the board there we've got a massive black dragon. We've got some paints. I put those on the vector, shook them up. And we'll probably have to do a little bit of shaking here and there as we go through, but today I am going to try to focus on finishing this black dragon. This black dragon is going to get some game time on the tabletop this week on our Thursday night game. So my goal is to put a lot of focus on this black dragon and try to get it done today. We will see. Now in between, as areas are drying, I will be working on a couple of other miniatures as well. Let's go into a little bit of detail on this dragon, what it is, and all of that. So this is a Bones 5 Kickstarter reward, and this is, I forget the name of it, to tell you the truth, but this is a black dragon and was part of the rewards from Bones 5 Kickstarter, which I was a backer for, and absolutely a beautiful sculpt. You can see here we gave them a little bit of glowing eyes. With the black dragon, we have been highlighting it with greens and little bits of browns, just to kind of differentiate fleshiness from scaliness. We've been highlighting up to different areas. You can see some damaged areas on the wings where we wanted to show kind of some meat showing through. And we worked on the horn, we worked on the underbelly, we worked on the sails. We have got about the upper half of this dragon done. So today the focus is going to be the underwings and then the lower half. So that is the goal. And then if we have time, finish out painting the base. You can see some vines, some dirt areas. We've already done the stonework on this destroyed spiral staircase going up, probably part of an old tower. Now I did seal this miniature. I've sealed it twice now actually in different stages with a clear matte varnish, just so I can handle it a little bit more, because the handle that I generally use for painting miniatures is just too small for a dragon this big. So that kind of catches you up with what we've got, where we're at, what the goals are for today. I've got my wet palette all set up. I am going to start, actually, because we're going to focus on the wings, the underwing area. I am going to start with the colors for this that we're doing. We are using the Reaper MSP non-metallic metal gold colors. So you may be wondering, why would we do this non-metallic metal gold? We're actually not going to be highlighting it up proper to a true non-metallic metal gold. But these colors are fantastic for this application because they are a brown yellow, if that makes sense. They have quite a bit of brown tone to them. And I am just using a large, massive brush here and looking for areas where our initial base coat is thin. I want to make sure I get a good, nice, opaque paint on this dragon. Now later today I'm going to be uploading a lot of videos from Twitch from this week onto our YouTube channel. Make sure you check that out. Just in case you want to see what we've done previously in the week, we have a lot of content We do stream 5 days a week. They are not every day, but we stream on Monday with some world building, Tuesday reviews, Wednesday character and monster generation. No streaming on Thursdays. That's one of my game days. And then Friday, I do just a summary of the week. So I do try to get that content moved over to YouTube. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of work, so that is what I try to do on my Saturday afternoons after we are done in the studio. And some of that really depends on how much time we spend in the studio, what we get accomplished in the studio, and what I have going on outside in the really real world. But you can see I'm just popping on a good coat of the non-metallic metal base color. That is that warm yellow brown. Now the reason I'm using that for this dragon is because in a black dragon's element, generally they are swampy, and it makes me think of almost like an alligator. And if you ever look at alligators and crocodiles, their colorings are very, on the underside, yellowed, greeny yellow and kind of browny yellow. So this color for me works really, really well. And again, we're not going to highlight it up to the highest non-metallic metal highlight for the gold. We are just going to be doing it like we did the sail and the underbelly. And again, just looking at areas that were thin, that we want to really make sure we've got a good opaque base, that as we highlight up, we've got good blends and everything plays off each other really, really well. Now, last week I actually had a question come to me via email about how much paint I use on a miniature and how long these bottles from Reaper's MSP line last. So here's an interesting fun fact on these dropper bottles. You get, I would guesstimate easily 350 drops of paint out of each bottle. This shade that I'm using here, I have got 3 drops on my wet palette. And you can see I have covered one entire massive wing and probably a good 3/4 of the second massive wing on 3 drops. So the bottles, these dispenser bottles, last me quite a bit. I actually prefer the dropper bottles versus paint pots, simply because they tend to keep a little bit better. When you're opening a pot, you know, you're letting basically fresh air in, and the upper part of the pot is just open. And so you tend to see them dry out pretty fast and gum up around the rim, in the lid. And while these are by no means absolutely perfect and will never dry up or anything like that, I will never say that about any paint, because you are able to close the pots up nice and tight, and they don't have as much like open area above the paint, I tend to find that the paint in the dropper bottles holds up well over time. So if you don't get to paint quite often, I think you see more success in keeping your paints pliable longer. So that's just my own personal preference. Of course, everybody has their own personal preferences. Yours are valid too. Now this dragon, as I said, is going to be seeing table play this week. So in the Last Light campaign that I run, there are kind of 3 paths that the characters can choose to go down, and it's all based on their early decisions in the game. They have 3 kind of leads on adventure. So one of them leads them in the direction of hunting undead and liches and all of that. One of them leads them into kind of hunting beasts and fantastical creatures. And then the other has them hunting demons and devils. So depending on what the players seem to get the most enjoyment out of, what they seem to engage the most with, kind of determines the focus point of the game. And this party that I am currently running through this campaign really latched onto the beast hunting part really, really well. So that has been kind of the focus of the group. They have been going after some different fantastical creatures and beasts and hunting dragons. So they came across a green dragon wormling, a white dragon wormling, a young red dragon, a young blue dragon. Now they're facing off against an adult black dragon. They just entered the dragon's lair this last game session. And so it's time for this big bad boy to make his debut. I'm going to give that just a moment to make sure it dries really well. Give myself a drink. And I've already got a drop of the base color on the wet palette. I am going to add a drop, or I'm sorry, that's the shadow color. So I'm going to add a drop of the base color onto the wet palette. Get my mixing brush and blend those two together. Now you'll see me in this process use a couple of different brushes. In this miniature here is going to be for tabletop play. So I am not doing super in-depth blending, and I am not super focused on really competition level paints or painting styles. I am just painting this for my players to be able to recognize what it is, and hopefully painting it well enough that they are happy with the creature. So again, nothing that I am doing competition level. If this were a competition piece, I would actually do another blend where I would have 2 parts of the shadow and 1 part of the base, and then probably 50-50. And then I would continue to bring it up slowly with more blends. But because I am looking at using this for the tabletop and painting quickly, I'm not going to have as many blended layers for more feathering and smoother transitions. These transitions will be kind of bold, but it's important to have good contrast, so we will have these transitions, and they will be discernible on the table because of the colors that we're using. And really taking it easy rather than creating our own blended colors. Using these triads is going to allow us to get good tonal blends. And if we need to go back to the pot, I suppose, we don't need to keep track of the colors that we have used. These colors with the triad are going to blend in really well to each other, going to work really well together, complement each other really well. And depending on the miniature that you're doing, so you can tell this one here I've already assembled, you can actually paint these before you assemble, which also gives you better competition and I would say even just overall opportunity for a better paint job. But again, it's a personal preference. I wanted to assemble this fellow pretty well before I started painting. And so I attached the wings on pretty early on. And now we just have to make do with painting this fellow in these awkward positions. So I know it's going to be a little more challenging for the camera to capture some of this because it is under the wing, which is bent, kind of cupping a little bit, I would say, cupping down. But as we set it down to rest and dry and clean and reload the brush, you'll be able to see more and more of the details that we're painting in. So process-wise, I am just following the sculptor's sculpt to highlight elevated areas. That drives that shadow color deeper in. And then allows us to really highlight the areas that the sculptor has sculpted into this miniature. And I'm still using my mixing brush for this because these strokes are pretty broad. We don't need to switch to our finer brush just yet. And because this underwing area is not going to be seen on the table, I'm able to really use a little bit rougher brush, which is going to help add into texture as well as get some of the transitions that I want to do nice and even. And you can see I'm just going through and adding in some basically lines to build texture in on the smoother areas. And then where it's sculpted, just really highlighting those areas. So on that inner wing there, you can see that really stand out, those shadows pushing back. And then on the larger areas where we are kind of painting in some of this texture, I'm just following some of the lines that the sculptor put in. So it is not rocket science, just a good plan of attack, and then steady execution is what you want to try to accomplish. Definitely, I mean, this is not easy, don't get me wrong. I've had a lot of practice. But with a lot of practice, it becomes more and more easy to accomplish. Again, I don't want to hide all of those shadows. I want to leave areas of that shadow color in there. Especially when it's further up in the fleshy part of the wing. I want to kind of do an effect where the lower parts of the wing, where you would think the skin or flesh is going to be thinner, are going to have more highlight than the upper inner parts of the wing. So that's the goal. But then also on these parts where the bone is very prominent, I want to have these highlighted as well, because this flesh would be stretched a little bit more over the bone. And again, this cupping of the wing makes it a little more challenging, because you have to really get up in there to bring these highlights in. It does make it a little more challenging, but not impossible. If you do have concerns about that, just paint prior to assembly. You'll be good to go. Touch up a couple little areas out here that I think the light would definitely be hitting. And then again, we're just going to add some little bits of line texture here. And watch for areas where we can call out some of the sculpt work that the sculptors have painstakingly put into the sculpt. And you can see I am just doing pretty much lines because I want a little bit more jaggedness. I want this to be a little more organic, so I'm not having smooth ends to the lines. I want these to be a little more jagged and random. Now, I should be putting my headphones in as well, because right now, premiering on YouTube, is the next session of the Athenaeum campaign by Hark, or Angel Arts. Angel Arts is the creator. He is the GM for the Athenaeum campaign, which I am lucky enough to be partaking in. If you have not seen any of Angel Arts campaigns prior to, I highly recommend checking out his channel and watching some of his campaigns. They're fantastic. He has GM'd for a number of different games and campaigns, including Harry Potter, Mass Effects, and more. The Athenaeum campaign, our cast, I think, is fantastic. It's a really cool concept of a game world and story. So if you are interested in watching some RPG, check it out. And the last little bit on this side, just with this little area here. And just kind of broken up lines. Lowering some texture in there. And already, comparatively, one side to the other, you can see how that paint use calls out the carvings or the sculpts on this dragon. So overall, very happy with that. Again, that is the lower mid-tone. So when we get to the next color, that'll be the mid-tone proper. So give the brush just a good cleaning. Again, this is just my mixing brush. It does not have a super fine point to it, and it allows me to have a little bit more texture as I'm doing this. And this side here has some very interesting texturing, especially way up in here. I'll add just little bits. Just get some cool textures laid down. You want to think, where is that light either hitting the wing or coming through the wing? Push those shadows back. Add some beautiful texturing. Now, the last time we did the, I guess, bone areas first, kind of. I'm actually going to save those for last. So this wing here is going to be a little more prominently seen. So I'm actually going to put a little bit more, because it's kind of out a little bit more too. I'm going to put a little bit more of these highlights in here, because I want this side to be kind of showing the light through the wing a little bit stronger. So a little bit more than we did on the last side with this highlight. I want to make sure that I try to stay in frame of the camera the best that I can, so that you can really see and follow along. In case you like to, or be able to see and ask questions. Which, if we have people jump on here, feel free to pop in that chat, say hello, ask any questions you may. And then, of course, if you stumble across us as you're just looking for things to watch on Twitch, don't hesitate. Give us a follow. That helps us grow and reach new people. We are definitely looking for opportunities to continue to grow, to reach new people, and talk about all things hobby related. And we can't do it without the community support, of course. You can also find some of our other socials. We do have a Facebook page. It's actually a group, I guess. It's not a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group that is just attached to my own at Facebook. I thought about doing a Facebook page. The challenge with that is time. What is it on? I think it's Star Trek Generations. It is. It's Star Trek Generations. Soran says, "Time is the fire in which we all burn." How true. Of course, what would you do with more time? If you had 6 more hours to the day, would we need to work those 6 more hours? If so, I don't want it. But if those 6 more hours we could work on whatever we wanted, oh heck yeah, I'd take it. Take more time to help build up our community and grow. Utilize that time to be able to talk a little bit more with some of my family. Maybe take a trip. Maybe pursue some different hobbies. So I love doing some additional hobbies aside from just miniature painting and gaming. I also do oil painting. There I'm kind of waiting for the weather to improve a little bit though. I want a little bit better weather for that. But I've got some canvases and I've got everything I need ready to go for it, but I need a little bit warmer weather. And you can see how I just kind of break up the lines a little bit. Now we'll go back through and start working on the bones. Start putting some highlights in here. Again, trying to think, because these wings, this is the lower part of the wing, they're not going to get direct light. So we really want to follow some of the textures and think, where are the highlights going to make the most sense? And I'm approaching these kind of from one direction, then I'll go through and do the next. You can probably hear we've got some lawn care going on, some landscaping. If it's disruptive, I apologize. So in the game, the lair of this black dragon, taken right from Gamma World, it is actually what is now in this game's world an ancient nuclear power plant. The players were kind of blown away when they came upon that realization. Curious as to how it got there in this fantasy world. What does it mean for the story? How can they best utilize that knowledge to impact the game? It was pretty awesome. I try to do very different and interesting stuff in my games all the time. Having played Gamma World and being a fan of blended RPGs, bringing in those sci-fi elements, goes all the way back to an adventure that, excuse me, my former GM brought us through that I thought was a lot of fun because I'm a fan of sci-fi as well as fantasy, where you were exploring in Greyhawk a crashed spaceship. And I thought it was pretty cool to have that as an element of D&D. A lot of fun, very intriguing, very interesting. And so yeah, I've tried in all of my games to bring in an element of sci-fi into my fantasy in different ways, shapes, and forms. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. And you can see as we are getting closer and closer to completing this layer, and we are driving those shadows in deeper, highlighting out sort of the texture in the sculpt. And really making I'm going to rough this up a little bit more with some paint. Really making a very interesting texture. Thin that down a little bit. And just a little more here. this to, this side here especially, I want this to be looking like the light is coming really heavily through this section of the wing. All right, so getting those highlights in there, what a difference that's already made. Incredible, incredible. Excuse me. Clean that brush real good. A clean brush is so important, as is a great tip. So the two things to really watch for when you're looking at brushes: how well it comes in, holds its tip, and how well you're able to clean the ferrule. So if you've done any painting before, you know that metal bit before the brush itself, before the fibers of the brush, keeping that clean is super important, because if you get paint in there that's going to dry, it's going to start pushing those bristles apart, and that's how you lose the tips on your brush. So always be cognizant, how is the ferrule to clean? Am I keeping it clean? Am I keeping it clean enough? Because if not, that's how you're going to have separation of those bristles. All right, I'm going to pause real quick for a station identification, we'll say, and I'll be right back. We'll get back to painting here in just a moment, but I got to stand up and stretch. It's been about 40 minutes. Making sure that you're keeping yourself stretched out and everything is super important. I'll be right back. If you happen to join us, pop a question into the chat that I can answer when I return. Oh, you got to keep that lower back moving, because if not, when you're sitting, especially if you're hunched over your table, you could lead to a lot of back problems. So you may need to do like Tylenol on occasion, but making sure that you're keeping that stretched out is super important. All right, now we've gotten that blend from the shadow to the midtone. We're going to add just straight midtone. Now, I'm not mixing that color, so I'm not going to use my mixing brush. I am going to use a size 2. So this is also a fairly big brush, but again, the tip is what's most important. Get one with a really good sharp tip. Pop that on the wet palette. You don't want to have too much paint on your brush. And we're going to go through and just start popping in some highlights. Now wet, this is going to look very stark. You'll see when it dries, it will dry a little bit darker. It's always going to be a little bit lighter when you're first applying. Now this is the highest color we're going to use. So we are not going to use the actual highlight. This is as bright as we're going to drive these colors. So being very cognizant of where we are laying these highlights is going to help determine both the angle that we are showing the light as well as the characteristics that the sculptor has sculpted into this miniature. So be very cognizant on where your highlights are being put, especially when you're working on something that is under cover of, in this case, the wing. And I'm going fairly fast, so I'm not doing a lot of like step-by-step showing. I've been working on this miniature for a long time, so I've already got a good idea of both the lighting that I'm trying to achieve as well as where I want the highlights to be. So I've already got a really good kind of understanding on this miniature. Again, the lawn care, if that is disrupting or distracting, I do apologize. Looks like they are working just outside the studio window here, so if it gets too noisy, pop a comment in chat and we'll adjust the sound as best we can. You can see I'm going in a different direction with my lines that I'm popping on here than I did the last time. This is going to make it almost like a cross-hatch pattern in these highlights. That is going to add a little bit more texture. And texture can be your friend. You want to really pay attention to what you are doing with the texture results as you are doing this painting. Maybe not so much on your tabletop pieces, but if you were doing competition, for sure, thinking about your texturing is super important. See when this dries and you see the side, just what this texturing is going to do for the light and shadows. So I've got another, I've got a lot of dragons, but I've got another dragon that I'm looking forward to do. I am tempted actually to start it after this dragon is done, so I'm still working on the dragon. It is not a Reaper Miniatures dragon, but the sculpt on it is absolutely gorgeous. It's actually one that my wife had gotten me. Alright, so you can see on camera there, those first two kind of panels, the light really playing on that. Now again, that's the highest color we're going to add into here for this part. I don't know, we may add one more in just in the center wing part. We'll see. I'll play around with it here in a moment and really make the final call. But if so, it would be a blend 2-to-1 of our mid-tone to the highlight. But we'll see. We will see. There is a lot of background noise. Again, I apologize. If that is distracting you, please give a little comment. I'm not seeing any comments yet, so that's good. But if it's distracting, let me know, and I will work on adjusting the sound. Here is where, if you've studied like light theory and everything, it can really have a big impact on how the light tones are going to be playing through this wing. Luckily, I've had a lot of opportunity to both study as well as practice. So again, I've got a really good idea of the effect I'm trying to do. Some of those bristles separating. That means too much paint in the bristles. We gotta get that out. So there we go. One side at least close to being done. Like I said, I'll play a little bit with one additional tone in just the wing parts themselves. So in these lower fleshy areas, I'll play a little bit with it after we get the other wing side done. Let's get that brush nice and clean. Make sure that we're not keeping any paint in that ferrule. I saw a little bit of brush separation, so I want to clean that out. Give myself a big fat drink. So in D&D, if you're not familiar with D&D, there are different types of dragons, and they primarily fall into metallic or chromatic. Metallics are good, chromatics are bad. For the chromatic, they basically go by colors. So we've got red, green, white, blue, black. So they're all color based. And oh, I actually see. So I'm seeing here real quick that underwing part here and here I did not paint. So I'm going to go back through and pop on some shadow color. I'm going to get my big brush. I'm going to paint those two areas. So anyhow, as I was saying, the dragons are different colored based on if they're generally good or bad. Black dragons are bad, and so they are chromatic dragons. But they're very different from like dragons in other media. So I think of things like Game of Thrones had dragons, right? Game of Thrones had multiple colored dragons. There was a green, a white, and a black, a blackish red. And those dragons were all extremely similar in their behavior. So their color did not dictate their breath weapon or their characteristics or anything like that. So it's kind of unique to Dungeons and Dragons that the color of the dragon is going to dictate their environment, their preferred environment, as well as their personality and how they behave. So I'm going to let that dry. And then we'll do one more coat, just like we did the rest of the wings. And then I'll blend the mid-tone with the shadow to make a low mid-tone. And we'll do the mid-tone, and we'll do this highlight. Not sure how I missed that. But I'm glad I caught it, because that would look a little, just a little funky. And again, just trying to add in little bits of detail based on where that light is hitting or going through, or where the flesh is stretched the most. But anyhow, back to the dragons. So with this next dragon that I'm considering painting, I'm thinking about painting it completely different. It is not going to be painted like a Dungeons and Dragons dragon. I am going to paint it kind of reds and browns, and it is going to be just a dragon. I'm going to use it for all different types of games and campaigns, but it is also going to be a competition piece. So it is going to take quite a while to paint. Wowzer, you see that? I'm splitting up again. Maybe time to change out this #2 brush and soak it in my brush cleaner. It helps pull paint out of the furrow. So I may have gotten some paint in the furrow. Thing we want to avoid, if at all possible, is that paint getting caught in the furrow. And you can see on this side I'm working on these ridge areas first. Previous highlight layers that I laid down, guiding the way. And this one, boy, this one's going to be a little more challenging to do the same way. There we go, you just got to put her upside down. Sometimes you got to shift the angle. Shift that angle. In under there and get our crosshatch pattern going really nice and strong. Highlight those areas where the light is going to be shining through the most. Look for opportunities to add texture. Very nice. I feel like I'm getting some good accomplishment today. Sometimes you can hit those paint blocks where as much as you want to paint and you've got good inspiration, it's so hard to get in and do it. So feeling really good today. Feeling really, really good. Of course, I've got a lot going on to make me feel good. This weekend is my wedding anniversary. Not this weekend, but Monday, 25 years. 25 years I have been married, and luckily my spouse has been a fantastic supporter of my nerdery, but not only that, but a wonderful mother to our kids, and an absolute gem of a person. So making me a better person as well, and just absolutely fantastic. All righty. Now I'm going to hit just once more those upper areas. Make sure they're good and opaque, based. Just like the lower wings. So that we can highlight those equally well. Consistency in this paint job. If we did not follow the same patterns and suits, you would definitely see variations on those two spaces. We want to avoid that if at all possible. If at all possible, we want to have super consistent coloring throughout. While that's drying, I'm actually going to go ahead and get some muddy brown, which I did not have prepped, so I'm going to have to shake it a little bit. And this may be a moot point, but while that's drying, I want to be painting something else as well. So in the sculpture at the base of the tower is some dirt and swampiness. I'm going to be applying this down, and then of course it'll get multiple coats of different color. It does have some vines growing up out of it. But as I said, I want to start getting this close to being completely finished. So I'm going to slather on some muddy brown on this base, so that we've got one more part closer to the finish line. As that other bit is drying, just allows us to keep moving on with the model. And trying to be careful of where the kind of dirt meets the stone. Try to keep it super clean. Because even though this is not for a competition, when it's not in game, it is going to be displayed with my other miniatures. So I don't want to have a poor paint job. I am, after all, a professional, so I have to act like such, especially on items that I'm broadcasting about. Now, of course, this is going to get different colors and layers added to it because there's still some like rocky debris and the vines. So think of this just as a base coat for the vines and a couple of rocks that will also be in there. Boy, it's challenging to get to like that. Sail of the tail. There's the leaf blower. I do hope that is not too distracting for you. apologize for the noise if it is too noisy. So pros about this little area here is I still have to redo part of the tail. So I can paint on that and it's going to be okay. And then when we touch up the tail, it will clean that up. So let's see, we've got some dirt here going up into some stone with that vine coming out. So is that stone or dirt? We're going to paint it and then make it stone a little bit later. So all the way up to that vine, we're going to make that dirt. Get in that crevice. And this is just muddy brown, another Reaper MSP color. Those are good ruddy, reddish brown. But a good base tone, so when we go to do basic dirt, on top of it, I do hope that's not too loud. It does look like the mic's picking it up though, so I apologize. All right, laying down that first muddy tone. They shouldn't be long blowing, I do apologize. But that's what happens when you twitch in the middle of the day. Life goes on for everybody out there, so. All right. Now we have got to do the blend of shadow and mid. Because it's a blend, I'm using my larger brush to mix those two colors together. Get that good mid-tone that we had on the wings. This layer, we're just dropping in highlights following suit. That will push our shadows in deep. Sides. Just like that, starting to form in. You know, it's hard to see because it's glossy. That's just because the paint is wet. Let's try an okay. Try an okay, just okay. But I do want to wait, and I don't want to touch it until it's dry. Let it dry all the way, all the way. Let's see, while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead now, and we are going to pop some pure black. Oh, that one looks like I did not clean it last time. Shame on me. also means I need to do the pokey tool. Keep that nice and open. Get some pure black. Now I've got about 4 dots, 4 drops on that. Now the reason I'm doing this is because you can see areas where I rubbed off paint because I did not seal it when I was working on the miniature. Oh my goodness, you can actually see some rubs on the wing. That is disappointing. That means I am not going to be able to lay it down as much as I had been earlier in the stream. I was hoping I did a real good thick heavy seal to protect that paint, but not so much. Not so much. Okay, so we just got to be more careful is all. So areas where I rubbed off, I am just going through and re-adding black, which is what I initially base coated this miniature in, pure black. That is going to cover up the gray that has shown through. That is the actual color of the miniature. The Bones miniature is that gray color. So I am just going and covering that back up so I've got a good black solid base anywhere that I rubbed it. And that's exactly what this is these are just areas that I rubbed the paint off. As I was moving it around to paint it. So our pure black right out of the bottle. Well, that means I do have to be extra careful on how I am holding it, so I'm going to try now just to hold it on the base. We'll see how that shows up on screen. Just so I can try to give you the best show possible. While still being able to paint. Because the last thing I want is just you watching me and not seeing what is getting done. So I will try to monitor to make sure that we've got good line of sight on what I'm doing. Now I'm not going to lay down the black on those rubbed areas on the wings. So I am just going to be doing it on the larger areas of the dragon. The wings, obviously the rubbed areas are the higher areas. So as we go to highlight the lower portion of this dragon, the scaly lower portion, which we have not yet gotten to, I can use the same highlights on those rubbed areas on the wings, and we will be just fine. So that is the game plan. Which is why finishing out these wings is so important, so that we can focus on the rest of this big bad guy. But doing it very, very well. And I'm going both forward and backward as I'm applying this paint so that I get not only the highlights, but that they're brought in to the lower areas as well, nice and even, because I don't want to build up just on those rubbed areas. I want this to really blend in with the paint that's already laid down there. So by making sure that I've got good coverage is basically connecting the two layers. And there we go. So the dragon back to being consistently painted. Pretty much. We do have those rub areas, and we will have to deal with those as well. Now while that is drying, see, now I'm almost afraid to grab it anywhere. I just need to create a new handle that I can use for these big miniatures, so I'm not having to touch them as much. Additionally, you can use things to help buffer them. I've seen people use things like bubble wrap, softcore foams, things like that. My challenge is, I think no matter what you use, you're going to have rubbing. So I'm going to try a little bit of paper towel and just see if that helps me protect any as I have to finger the model. But with that said, let's move on a little bit to those underwing areas. And we are moving right along. We got that mid-tone done. I am grabbing, or the lower mid-tone I should say, grabbing the mid-tone. Yeah, sure makes it challenging a little bit. And we're just going to cross-hatch a little bit here, just a little bit. And here a little bit. Just come under here, do just a little bit more. So I've watered this down, and I just want to go and pick some of the areas that I'm thinking about doing that additional lighter color, and just connect some of those cross hatches just a little bit more. With this being thinned out a little bit with some of my water, this should just help blend in a little bit more. On this side, all I'm doing is going now at like a third direction with this thinned down. So this is basically almost a wash that I am applying to these areas. just to connect these a little bit. Diffuse a little bit of the cross hatching. Have a little bit more blend. Now for the last step here, very little bit of that highlight color, or mid-tone, blended. Make this also very thin like a wash. And this is the area where I said we're going to test a little bit, see what we think. This is going to be the brightest areas. So where is the light shining through almost? Let's check and see how this comes out and if we like it. It's hard to say if we'll like it or not. And then anywhere where the light for sure is giving us direct color. And we'll touch that just a hair. And then again, same process on this side. Smaller areas than that last highlight we did, because this is also going to be kind of diffused. But this will allow us to give the illusion of more light coming through select areas. And then we'll look and see how it looks, what we think. Do we need to go back over it with the previous color? Because it doesn't look right. Or does it look okay and that will be our final highlight? We'll soon know. Just a couple more little areas here that I want to hit. Not too bad, I don't think. Not too bad. Looks pretty good. With that, should we do any on the uppers? Yeah, let's do just a little bit. This is going to be a very, very minute amount. Just the slightest little bit. Thinnest areas. There. That adds a lot of contrast in there. Nice. All righty. Time about an hour and a half in. Not too bad. Not too bad. And that black is just about all dried. You still see a little bit in there that's got just a little bit of sheen in the deepest crevices. We do want that to be 100% dried before we start tackling it. Boy, oh boy, are we getting close. I think I'm going to stretch out once more. I'm going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to leave this dragon here. Let's get him in a good spot where you can see down his head. I will be right back, and then we'll start working on the scales. Let me put my black away so we can focus on the colors we're going to be using, which will include green liner. Maybe we'll have to move the dragon. Green liner, Gobbler Green, and Highland Moss. We are getting so close to finishing the scales. Then we've got to finish the claws, and then we've got to finish the base painting, seal it, and then we can do the base elements, and this fellow is done. So take a quick break and be right back to start working on the scales. All right, another stretch break done. Thank you for your patience. If you're joining us here, we're going to be painting the Black Dragon. This is the Green Oaks channel, and today is our studio day, bringing it to life. Now I put my number 2 on the paper towel just to see what would happen when the brush was dry, and it's definitely got some bristle separation, so I'm going to have to move that aside and pop that into my cleaning solution, which will pull material out, which means I need to grab a different brush. Luckily I do have some backups. So I'm looking for a number 2 is what I want to start with. And lots of number 1s and 0s. Those are also very good sizes of brush. 30-aught, triple-aught, 10-aught. There we go. There's a number. Oh, that's a number 2 flat. There we go. There's a brand new number 2. Now, I'm not using any of my sable hair brushes on this because this is a tabletop miniature. I'm not doing super fine work for competition level. I am just doing some painting for my own personal use, display, and in-game use. So going back to our wet palette, I'm going to put out 3 drops of green liner. Green liner, you can see it looks black. However, as I go to apply this green liner, I'm going to start on the arms and then legs, and it's a little bit funky because some of these go the opposite way from the way I'm holding it. And I'm leaving some of the black showing because the black is the base color, that is the deepest shadow color. I still want that to remain. There will be a finite amount of color variation when you see this on the table, from the black to the green liner. Even though the green liner looks black, there is some color variation in it. But I need the green liner because when I blend the green liner and Gobbler Green, it will blend better than it would to the black. So super important, make sure your layers tonally work well with each other. And for this, I just apply some lines because I do want to add texture to this miniature. I don't want this to be super smooth. I want texture lines. And this is going to be the widest coverage of the highlight colors, which are the 3 greens that we just viewed momentarily. Or a moment ago, I suppose I should say. Now this is where it really starts slowing down because these scales are sculpted very beautifully, pros and cons to that. Pros are you've got just absolutely gorgeous sculpt. Cons are, of course, it takes more time because they are all individually sculpted. So just keep that in mind as you are painting. That this sculpt is going to vary on how much time it's going to take. And you'll see as we go through this, continuing to highlight, some of them will get different radiance or coverage of highlight because the scales get pretty small. Trying to cover with multiple layers can be pretty challenging. The biggest thing when you're working on scales is to think about where they would be rubbing the most. So ridges for sure, and edges. You're going to want to make sure you have the best highlighting on the ridges and the edges. And when you get into the smaller scales, it's going to take less and less paint to get that coverage you're looking for. That's okay. And as I'm closer to the area that the scales kind of meet up, I am trying to be more careful to make sure that the black is easily identifiable. There we go, one arm done. Get a little bit more in here. Carefully. And clean that brush out. Clean it out real good. I don't want this one separating like the last. Alrighty. On to the next arm. So this one here, also we just have this lower arm. Some of these scales will be a little more challenging to get to because of the wing. That's okay. As well as the tower. Again, it depends on if you do more painting prior to assembly or assembly prior to painting. It is a personal preference piece. For me, I like to do as much assembly as possible because if I have very noticeable joints, I want to use green stuff to plug them up and have a more cleanly assembled miniature. And while you could, oh, I hit the camera, sorry. While you could do the painting and then assembly and then green stuff in the areas and retouch those areas with your paint, I just find for me it is easier to deal with things like the green stuff prior to painting. But again, everybody's going to be unique and do it differently. And if you are catching our channel just kind of midstream, I'm Joe with Green Oaks Gaming. Today is Saturday. It is our in-studio paint day. So just focusing on painting. This is a miniature that I'm going to be using in-game on this Thursday's game night. So I'm hoping to get it done to completion today. We will see. If it does not get completely done, I'm still going to use it in-game and just let my players know that it is not yet complete. So I'm focusing on the arms with the first base coat of green liner. So this is a black dragon. The challenge with painting black, I'm actually going to be doing a course on painting black for ReaperCon this year if it gets accepted. Is how do you highlight black without making it gray? Most time when you're highlighting something, you add white, right? You definitely can. You definitely can. The challenge is with black, when you do that, you gray it out. So for me, I find it more satisfying to highlight colors like black with what I call their element colors. So this black dragon, most black dragons generally live in swampy areas. It's going to be very moldy and mucky. So browns and greens are actually better colors to highlight with. So green and brown liners make great choices to highlight from. Using those as kind of the base tone to build color on top of black still allows it to stay black, but also incorporating different colored highlights. Excuse me. And yes, this is definitely the most tedious aspect of this paint job because all of the sculpting of these scales. So I want to do a great job though. Really highlight these scales nice and cleanly. And also because this is such a massive figure, it's definitely going to take more time than a standard 28mm figure. So just be prepared for that. You'll be good to go. So just like on the wings, I leave the deepest areas black and then just start building on that with the green liner. Hitting each of the scales individually. And I know that wing is blocking some here. I apologize. Get this outer portion, I suppose. Then we'll move to the inner part of the leg. Again, just kind of putting some lines down so that we build in texture. That texture is going to be very important as we get higher and higher in our values of highlight as well. So start laying it down now with your green liner so you kind of know what you're doing. Can plan ahead, and it's going to help show you how that paint wants to flow on the different crevices and cracks and areas. The sculpture is going to guide you a lot. Make sure you use it. You'll see some areas where you'll be able to really almost just dry brush. All right, now let's get this adjusted a little bit and start working on the inner leg. Pretty challenging area. Because of that base, as well as parts of the body as well. So those inner legs, we know already, are going to be some of the most challenging that we'll have to fight with. Again, knowing that ahead of time before we get to the next levels of color is going to help us plan on how we lay those colors down. There. Luckily with the other side we've already done that leg. So that gets us our arms. I'm bumping that camera a lot, sorry. Gets us our arms, our legs. Now we're going to come in and start doing the body. And same exact thing. We're going to look at the ridges and the edges the most. Add in some texture. And when I worked a little bit on that upper back, some of these scales on like the back side, the upper back side, I guess, I did the tops but not the sides. So we've got to make sure that we've got consistency on the scales. That's why having colors set and picked and using them right out of the bottle on this sculpture are very important. Or keeping track of the formula that you're using. Super important. write it on a card, pop it in your Google Docs, whatever makes the best sense for you. Keep track so you can keep consistent. And we're just painting scales. This is going to take quite a while because these scales are all individually sculpted. Just know that something like this you're going to spend some time on. These are not super quick and easy miniatures to paint. And you could go through and do a speed paint on this. It wouldn't be bad. For me, I'm not much of a speed painter. There are times I'll do them when I've got a lot of miniatures to do. But for the most part, I'm not a big fan of the speed painting style and technique. Again, everybody's different. Do what you do best. Do what's going to bring you the most enjoyment. Get you the results you're after. Could be speedier to the table, done painting faster, highest quality, whatever the case. However you're painting, you do you. There is so much opportunity to, just absolutely take one of these sculpts and make it so unique and different in both your style, your color choices, the whole 9 yards. I participate on and off in Reaper's Challenge League. There again, it's a Reaper Miniatures program, but some of them they like pick out the miniature that you have to paint, and then you just paint it. Sometimes they'll pick out like colors and everything too, but I really like the ones where they just pick out a miniature, say, hey, paint this miniature, and we'll judge them, and the one that gets the most upvotes is going to win, a gift certificate or added point, whatever the case may be. Seeing the variances on how different people paint the same miniature is so interesting to me. I love seeing things like that. Seeing how different people not only apply different techniques, but think of their miniatures in color is so interesting. I love seeing things like that. All right, let's get back up in here. Get some of these caught up to where we're at on that tail. Try to keep that brush nice and clean. So I did 3 drops of my green. You can see we're getting a lot of coverage off of 3 drops. It's actually 3 drops is a lot. But this is a big mini. Big mini. So It's going to take a lot more paint, but on average, when I am painting a miniature, I'm doing 1 drop at a time. On a 28 millimeter miniature, 1 drop of color at a time is all I'm laying down on my wet palette, because the paint goes a long way. So again, average bottle of my MSP paint, I'm getting about 300 plus drops out of. I would say probably even more than that, and now that I think about it, but I don't know, it's a lot. So think about that. 1 drop per color that I'm painting on a miniature. Well over 300 miniatures. It's a really good value. Getting close to the spines. I'm going to go back up here and get this side. Last probably day and a half, I figured I better. I've been having a lot of people talk about the Book of Boba Fett, so I figured, well, I better start catching up a little bit on The Mandalorian. I am still on season 1, so I have been trying to watch an episode a day. I have not watched one yet today, but I just got to the episode where Boba Fett is on The Mandalorian. So I don't want to give any spoilers, but if you know where that's at, you'll know how far behind I am from everything. So later this evening I'll watch one more. Try to get caught up so that I can try to get caught up on the Book of Boba Fett. And just so many like different shows and everything streaming. I'm not big on watching TV and stuff. So I have a hard time. So when I'm hanging out at home or anything, I would rather be painting or creating, and when I'm doing that, I'm generally streaming. And of course, watch here, I'm going to cheat and do just like a side brush, dry brush in these ones here. So yeah, I don't have licenses, of course, to rebroadcast any of that. I don't want to get any strikes, so it's all just on my own time. And right into the spines. So the spines I actually am not going to do, as well as that, the rest of that lower tail. And just make sure I get some of this underfoot there. Use up what's on my brush. But that's going to get us a good start on this miniature. Get a drink. Whew. 2 hours so far in the studio. I'm feeling feeling good about that. Now the green liner, we're going to blend with Gobbler Green. Oh, and we got a blockage. Get our paint pokey tool. You know, a lot of people say that's the challenge with the dropper bottles, which, you know, I can understand, but compared to a pot that is all dried out, I would rather use my pokey tool. Pop it in that top, open it up. Look at that, good to go. So 2 drops of Gobbler Green, along with 2 drops I've already put aside on that green liner. I'm going to blend that bad boy together. Using my mixing brush. I do have a set brush just for mixing. And back to the old number 2. I'm actually going to add a drop of water into this, just so I get a real good thin consistency. And going right back to the arms. And just starting to do a little bit smaller area and focusing on edges and ridges with this blend. Pick out your edges and your ridges primarily. This is where you'll start to see a lot of variation. The green is really going to stand out now. And when we highlight, the next layer, which is going to be just Gobbler Green, is going to be even more apparent. And that is why that blendability, having those colors that will blend together nice and well, is so important. Because we want it to be somewhat subtle, but readily apparent. And not quite as much coverage as we did on the green liner. Just enough that we can tell the differentiation between these scales. Again, really focusing on the ridges and edges. Of those scales. start helping push those shadows in deep. Giving your scales more separation from each other. Making them look stacked upon each other. Keep that brush nice and clean. So you can see a little bit on that arm where it's starting to separate those scales even more. Those shadows are becoming more apparent as we highlight. Super, super important. Some of these, again, where they get small, this is probably the area where you really want to start thinking about how to edge highlight. On the next tone, we won't be doing as much. So smaller and smaller bits, ridges and edges. And because I'm on this side, I'm going to start coming down on this side of the tail, the lower body and tail. These green colors are actually, I was a little nervous about using them at first. I thought more about using purples for this. But the greens, I actually have been really, really happy with how this has been turning out. And lightly, again, just with the side of my brush. Hitting this side. But I have really been pleasantly impressed with how these colors have been laying down on this miniature, coming together really well. If I paint another one of these, I am going to try it with purples just because I'm curious more than anything. I'm really curious of how it's going to come out. Um, but yeah, overall, I have been extremely happy with this miniature, how these colors have been coming together really well. I'm a little concerned about the horns, to tell you the truth. You can see the kind of brown horns. The white horns seem to stick out a little bit too much, which I'm not a big fan of. Now that I think about it, I should have followed suit on these curled horns and had them look the same. But I really wanted to do the brown horns. So I don't know. I'm still kind of torn. Do I go back and redo them or not? We'll see when I do the claws and everything if it makes a difference to how I view those horns. We will see. And just painting right along. Going to do the same process we did last time, where we're just going to do outside then inside. Some of these have almost, like, I hate to say warts, but yeah, almost warts to them. It's kind of interesting. The wings had that a little bit as well in select areas. But then in some ways it's kind of cool, because if they are, swampy dwellers, do they have that like a toad maybe? I don't know. Just an interesting facet of the sculpt. Some of these foot areas. Trying to be very careful how I'm holding this on that back end so I don't rub that tail more. But you can definitely see now more of the green element coming through over the black, giving us that separation that we're looking for in those scales. next layer we add is going to be straight Gobbler Green. So we'll have a lot of variation in tone, driving a lot of contrast. So we've got to be very mindful how we set that up for success. Oh, hit that camera, sorry. Didn't mean to send you on the waves. And just like that, the legs are done. Now the next level. Once we get this all laid in here and done, Gobbler Green, we'll see where we're at on time as well as viewers. I know Saturday is kind of an odd day. When I was looking at the schedule, and we were talking about the schedule that we're going to do for our channel, all of the support was saying we should do like these crazy hours, pretty much starting at midnight Pacific Standard Time. And I was, you know, they say it's because there's less people streaming and less competition, and you're more likely to gain new followers and this and that and the other thing. But because I work a regular full-time job as well, that just is out the window. So if you do happen to catch our show, give me a thumbs up or a follow. A thumbs up just in the comments. I know this isn't like YouTube where you can leave a thumbs up, but give me a thumbs up in the comments. Let me know if you caught us on the live stream or on the video on demand, or after we post this to YouTube, just because it's going to help us, you know, kind of decide how we take the future of all of our channels, YouTube, Twitch, now, depending on feedback we get, we may adjust our channels. Who knows? Who knows what can happen? Probably we'll only paint for a couple more layers. And then call it a streaming day so that lunch can be had. I feel like we're doing some pretty good progress on this. I have been pretty happy with the progress we have been making on this miniature. Cheat a little bit here and do some side brush, so almost like dry brushing. But pull some of that paint out of there. That was pretty close, so that was and we're getting down to the very little bits here on the wet palette of that color. And getting right down to the area that we were painting to. So pretty close in our measurements. Of paint that we used. Now the next layer we're going to do is going to be Gobbler Green. And that means I can put the green liner down for now. I suppose I still need to keep it close because when we move to the end of the tail, that will be the same. So this Gobbler Green, we're going to pop 3 drops down. And I am going to switch to a size 1 brush. So my size 2 can go back into the caddy. Wrap up that tail a little bit. That's not the size I want. Now with this Gobbler Green, same exact thing. We're going to focus smaller amounts, edging and ridge to drive in more separation. On these scales. Tedious, tedious. And yes, indeed, it can be tedious, but where else can you paint a dragon any color you want making a fearsome beast or a friendly creature that you can use on your own gaming table. Again, focusing on ridges and edges. Think of where those scales would wear, where they would rub. Give some little dots and dashes to them to really drive in some texture. Keep that brush nice and clean. Smaller areas than what we've done before. So we want that previous layer to still be visible through. excited to get this bad boy on the table. I can't wait to hear what my players think. I want this to really surprise them and, you know, live up to the hype that they have been getting about this black dragon. I want them to be blown away when they see this fellow, hit that camera again, on the table. For me, that's one of the fun things about RPGs. While I am a big fan of theater of the mind, there is just something about using game aids to bring your games to life. And miniatures are a fantastic way to do that, in my opinion. I think when you drop a miniature down on the table, your players have a better opportunity to role play their characters based on what they see. So I am a big fan of it. I really enjoy it. But that's true of a lot of game aids, which is why we started Green Oaks Gaming. I mean, game aids are a fantastic resource, and we create and sell a lot of them for all different types of games, from maps to dice boxes and dice sets and apparel. We really feel game aids add an element to the game that theater of mind, while really fun and engaging, just does not have the ability to capture in eliciting immediate responses from the players. So game aids and miniatures for me are a super important part of my gaming. Now this part here is where we really have to be careful of what we're edging and highlighting. So I'm going to start putting in some separation on some of these smaller scales to where just the upper portions are going to be able to get highlighted. Because when we do that next level, we're looking out the window. When we do that next portion, where it'll be Gobbler Green blended with a little bit of that Highland moss, we're going to have a big transition. And the colors are going to be massively, massively different. So really thinking about what gets highlighted here sets the stage for the next level as well. This is where you really can make it or break it. With really good, even highlighting layers that support each other. Or highlights that just feel fake and forced. So really picking out what you are going to be putting this Gobbler Green, this mid-tone, on is super important. Especially when you get into some of these areas where the scales are even smaller. cognizant of how you are applying this level specifically. Get those warty areas for sure. And then this one I'm actually going to do the inner part first. Just because it's a smaller portion that I can get done fast and be done with it. Feels like that temperature outside has dropped. Here in the studio, it's starting to get a little cool. I have to check and see what the temperature is because I don't want it to be too cold. Well, that can help extend your paint drying time. It can also have some negative effects on your paints themselves. All right, now let's get to getting these outer layers. You can see where I have already gotten some. Small little areas are definitely the challenge areas. And think of your ridges. That's what's going to get rubbed the most, so that's where your highlights should focus. Oh yeah, I can hear that wind blowing. Of course, I did not check the weather today, so I don't know exactly what we're supposed to be in for. All right, that leg done. Now this is also where I'm going to touch up a bit of these winged areas. Just lay down just a touch of this Gobbler Green on those areas where we rubbed. Nice. All right, now into the scales. The body, moving right along. course, these scales are focusing on the ridges. And just driving that separation from the highlight, the high point of those scales, to the scale below it, which should still be black. Because our shadows didn't go in those deepest recesses. So this green layer will stand out even more compared to the scale below it. Oops, sounds like I got a notification for something. You know, it's kind of comical here when I first sat down this morning in the studio and was thinking, yep, I am going to get this miniature done in no time because I'm so close. I've got under the wings, I've got the lower half, and then just the nails and base. So that was kind of my thought process. Until you start actually getting into it and getting into a rhythm and really seeing what the times are. But it can be so misleading, the time it takes to paint a miniature. And again, it's going to vary from person to person, but it just, you know, again, it's kind of comical in your expectations versus reality, I suppose. Here I thought, yeah, 2 hours, I'll have this bad boy done. Be good to go. Yeah, not so much. All right, let's get back up here a little bit. Get back up on these larger ones. But it's pretty exciting. We are actually pretty close if you think about it, comparatively. The underwings didn't take too long, I don't think anyhow. I thought they went by pretty smoothly. We did have the one area where I missed that upper portion, but we're able to really quickly get those caught back up. The scales just take long because they are pretty labor intensive with all these differently sculpted scales. Just doing a good clean job can take some time, but overall I'm really happy with the progress we've made so far. I think it's coming along really well. And realistically, we've got two more colors, a blend of Gobbler Green and the Highland Moss, and then Highland Moss. So realistically, we've covered a lot of colors already. Take just a little bit of that off. So overall, I'm really happy with the progress we've made so far today in the studio. I do think after this Gobbler Green, we're going to call it good for right now. get a little grindage going, stretch out again, hit some fresh air because that's always important. I do want to see what that weather is doing. And then who knows, maybe a little bit later tonight we'll come back to the studio and do some more live painting this evening. And I would love to work a little bit on, I've got the Drow Elf that I would love to work on screen with a little bit, and to talk about some fantasy skin tones for Drow Elf. Maybe we work some more on this one and get it to its scaled finishing point. I don't know, we'll see. We will see. We're getting close on this one though, so maybe we would finish this one out. This one we're getting right up to that edge there. Yeah, overall from where we started today, I'm pretty happy. I mean, we've got highlights going on really well. Little bits of rub that I did accidentally cleaned up. 2 layers to go on the scales. And then we've got the claws and that lower sail to do. The spines on the lower sail. So all these back claws on the wings, the claws on the feet and arms, I suppose. And then just the basing stuff. So getting super close. We do have some scales here, and no, that side's done, but some scales here that we could do pretty quickly. Just finishing out those arms and legs with the next blend. And yeah, getting closer and closer. I am super stoked and happy with where it's coming at. But I think for now, we're going to do a little bit of a pause. We're going to end the stream, get some food. Hope everybody has a fantastic day. We may be back a little bit later, who knows. Make sure to check us out on all of our social medias. I hope if you were able to watch us that you enjoyed.